Hi, this is Tom Needham, and you are listening to the Sounds podcast and Sounds of Film radio show, where we're going to be diving deep into an incredible movie that's going to be featured at Doc NYC. We're speaking today with Wendy Lobel, the Emmy-winning producer and director behind the new feature documentary Anxiety Club. This powerful and funny film takes an intimate look at anxiety through the lives of some of today's most brilliant comedians, including Marc Maron, Joe List, Tiffany Jenkins, Eva Victor, and more. Through stand up performances, candid interviews, sketch videos, and even private therapy sessions, Anxiety Club explores the universal struggle with anxiety and how humor can be both a coping mechanism and a form of healing. Wendy has spent over 3 decades telling compelling stories and giving voice to the unheard through her work with PBS, A&E, Nickelodeon, and beyond. With the Anxiety Club, she brings her personal experience with anxiety into focus, offering a rare, behind-the-scenes perspective on mental health in the comedy world. Wendy, thank you so much for joining me on the program.
Thank you for having me, Tom, and thank you for that introduction.
Yeah, of course. This is a fascinating film. Maybe you can give our listeners just a little introduction to how you came up with the concept for this film and how you got in contact with all these different comedians to make this happen.
Yeah, well, I would say that the seed was planted about 10 years ago. I worked for many years on the series Nick News with Linda Ellerby. I worked with Linda Ellerby for her production company. And I did an episode on teens with anxiety for that series. And in the process of working on that episode, I saw not only how much suffering there was because of anxiety, excuse me, but also how profound the healing was when some of these kids that we featured went through a certain kind of therapy called exposure therapy. And so I didn't really know much about it at that time, even though I have struggled with anxiety for my adult life. So anxiety, has always been a very interesting and important, topic for me. I sometimes I say it's my favorite topic, but it was at that time that I thought, okay, there needs to be something bigger about meeting a bigger audience for a bigger audience than just kids. And so, started thinking about that and talking to some of my colleagues from the beginning, it was that I wanted to do a look at anxiety through the eyes of, initially it was just going to be regular people, but I wanted to show the experience of anxiety because it's so hard for people who don't have anxiety to understand what it feels like. And I always wanted to take someone through the process of exposure therapy because I believe in it so much. And it's also something that's very, it's kind of easy and compelling for film. So initially it was going to be regular people with anxiety, and maybe there was going to be one comedian. But as I started looking into comedians, it became clear that that was going to be a more compelling way to tell this story. And so it became a film about the experience of anxiety through the eyes of anxious comedians and how to get from anxious to calm or calmer. And all of these comedians, we chose comedians who not only have anxiety, but are very open about it. They do sketch comedy about their anxiety. They do stand up about their anxiety, and they're hilarious, and they're very smart and very engaging. And it just, we knew that if they were doing material about their mental health, that they would be very comfortable talking about their mental health. And that in fact was the case.
Well, it certainly seemed it. I know they work it into their act and their writing, but it's a whole nother thing to let a filmmaker into one's house, into one's apartment, into one's therapy sessions. I mean,
Yes.
you must have been very persuasive, um, because, like I said, it's a whole nother thing. They must have been a
Yeah.
little nervous at first. How did you persuade all these very talented comics to allow you to follow them into their personal lives?
Well, it was different for each comedian. I mean, first of all, they all knew that I am very familiar with anxiety, so they knew that I could relate to their experiences. In a couple of cases, yeah, we went to their apartments and we did some filming inside. And I think I made sure that they knew that they could say no to anything that I asked, so that it wasn't exactly that they were in charge, but they they got to veto anything that they didn't want to do or that they weren't comfortable with, and that did come up occasionally. With Tiffany, the character who we followed through therapy, she is an open book. I mean, one of the things that is so special and unique about her online presence, her social media presence, is that she says it like it is. She doesn't, sometimes she would do videos. She wakes up in the morning and looks how she looks without spending a half hour, putting her makeup on and being perfect. And, there's something that's, very compelling about that. But it's a certain kind of a person who is clearly comfortable being public with who she is. And
Yeah,
so
yeah,
I'm sure she was, I think she probably was very fearful of doing the therapy, but she also wanted to do it. She wanted, she has two small kids, and well, they're getting bigger now, but she has, two kids, and she felt like she was really hurting them by having, bringing her anxiety into their lives, and so many things that she didn't let them do because she was too fearful. And so she had a strong motivation to get better. And she had already been thinking about doing this particular kind of therapy, which is all about facing your fears. And so, it was very difficult for her, but we made sure that she knew that she could stop at any time, or if there was anything that she wasn't comfortable with, she would tell us. And but she just went for it, and all of the comedians did. And they're public people, so in that way, it made it a little bit easier for them to let us into their lives.
well, as I said, I've seen the film and I really enjoyed it. But I was wondering, like in the beginning, when you started making the film, you mentioned that you made sure that everyone could say if they didn't want something included in the film. Now, I talked to a lot of documentary filmmakers, and that is something that a lot of filmmakers wouldn't allow. A lot of people take pride that there's no ground rules in my documentaries. Yeah, once the subject agrees to it, they have to agree to my vision. Why did you have to do that a little bit differently, and why did it still turn out so good?
Well, to clarify, it wasn't, none of the comedians were part of the editing process. So
Okay.
basically what we shot was all in the control of my team, and my control and my team's control in
Uh,
terms of what we kept
yeah.
in and what we didn't. What I meant was that when I was filming with them, in particular, because there's the anxiety component of it, I made sure that they were comfortable with what they were allowing us to film. So, for example, well, let me think of an example. Of course, I can't think of any, but if there was, when we were in their apartments, or, out and about with them, if there was, if they would have said to me, hey, listen, I need a break, or, I feel a little uncomfortable with you
Mm,
filming me right here, or, I would respect that as much as possible. Um, once we filmed what we filmed, then that was up to us what we use. I would say that one of the comedians had said some things about his childhood, and after the interview, he was concerned about it, and he said, please be easy on my parents. And in the end, we didn't end up using it, and it wasn't because he was worried about it. We just didn't end up using it. But I think I would have, I would have wanted to be respectful of that, and not put something in if it wasn't critical for the film, if it was going to be something that was going to make their lives harder. So it was really more about on location. I always just wanted to make sure that they were okay and comfortable with what we were filming.
Yeah, that makes sense. I have to say, I feel like, mental health is talked about so much. I read so many articles and books, but I learned so much from watching this film, and it was
Well,
entertaining. So, like, mixed into all the comedy, you learn some stuff, and I think that will be true for a lot of people. One of the most basic things, which I think probably a lot of people know, but you mentioned in the film that anxiety is not exactly the same as depression. Can you explain to
right.
our listeners the difference?
Anxiety is kind of more of an active emotion. I mean, it's a feeling of fear or dread or uneasiness or uncertainty that stems from like the perception that there's a perception of danger. There's a
Mm,
threat. There's an imminent threat, right? And so, for example, in the past, if our ancestors, maybe there would be anxiety if there was a bear or somebody who was about to attack them, and they would feel anxious. And so it's like now with anxiety, the way that it seems to have evolved is that we feel a threat to things that aren't a threat, but we feel like it's a threat. We have that same response
yeah,
as if there's a threat or something that we need to be worried about when there isn't. And to be honest, depression is I don't know as much about depression as I do about anxiety, but I think of it as like two sides of the coin in a way, where depression is sort of a lower, it's a difficult getting out of bed, and we're not wanting to do things, and uh, whereas anxiety is much more active. It's the spinning and ruminating for many people, or it's
mm,
social anxiety, going to a party and being concerned that everybody is judging you by just the simplest of things that you might do. So I think of it like that. And also I should mention that for many people they go together. Many people
yeah.
with anxiety also have depression. Many people with depression also have anxiety.
One of the things that I think you attempted to do, and it's so good, is you really get a sense of what each of these comics is feeling. And there's all kinds of different fears or anxiety that they're experiencing. So you learn about a lot of them. I enjoyed the segments with Marc Maron. Um,
Yeah.
and I mean, some people wouldn't understand this, but like when you watch the film, you get a better sense of it. When he was just even saying stuff like he got these incredible tickets to a Rolling Stones concert and he just won't go. like, can you explain that? Like, that's not the normal kind of fear that I think most people who don't experience it would understand. But maybe as just one example, you could share that with the listeners.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's so true. I mean, that was a really funny bit that he does, that he worries, he gets tickets to Rolling Stones concert, and the first thing that he thinks about is where, no parking, where am I going to park? And also, how he would talk about he wakes up in the morning and he's like, oh no, I have to have lunch with my friend, and
Right.
just like the simplest of things. And that's what makes anxiety so difficult for people who have anxiety. And I can relate to this because there are
Mm,
certain aspects of things that were talked about in the film that I've experienced or do experience. And and so with normal anxiety, like, I mean, everybody has a certain amount of anxiety. It's normal if you're going to take a test, or if you have a blind date, or you're going to give a presentation. I mean, that's all, it all makes sense that you're going to have some stress prior to that event. But when there's when it's a problem, or sometimes if it's a disorder, it's the kind of anxiety that is sometimes not as rational or understandable, and it's something it's affecting one's daily lives. So it could be, I mean, for me, for example, I've had, I'm better now, but for a good part of my life, decisions would be really, really difficult for me.
mm,
So if I'm deciding whether to, which printer to buy, and I'll do excessive amounts of research, and then maybe it'll be down to two, and then I'll go back and forth on which one is better, and then I'll read a bad review on one, and they're like, oh, that's like I'll hop from one side to the other side, and to somebody who doesn't struggle with anxiety, they would be like, okay, just pick a printer. I mean, who
Right,
cares?
right.
And that's true, and that's what I've learned, that it's better to pick a printer that's not the perfect printer than to not have any printer, because you can't pick the perfect one. But when you have anxiety, especially that's untreated, these things can really become bigger and can be debilitating. And for many people, I spoke about that episode I did for Nick News. There's several of the kids stopped going to school. One case, it was this boy who was a perfectionist, and he had to get A's in everything he did. And so it got to the point where he couldn't go to school anymore because he couldn't live up to that standard and that he set for himself. And it can be so debilitating for the people who struggle with it, and for people who don't have anxiety, it's very difficult to understand. And that was one of the other reasons why I wanted to make this film, is because it's such a hidden condition. And I think there are a lot of people who love somebody with anxiety and who can't relate, who don't understand. And I'm hoping that this will help people see that, understand it a little bit better and have compassion for those people. And hopefully the people who have anxiety and who are suffering with it will see that they're not alone, and they can get help.
Well, I think this film does that, and it must have not been an easy job um, to do this. Like, I'm amazed at how these comedians can work it into their act, because
Yeah.
on one hand, we're commonly told that this is a very serious issue that a lot of people struggle with, and it needs to be taken seriously, and yet they turn it into humor. and
Yeah.
and I don't know how you did it in this film, but how do you strike that balance between treating it seriously and also having some fun with it?
That's such a good question. Well, I mean, I think the humor makes it easy for people to ingest, talking about something that's serious. It's very relatable. The comedians are very relatable. Their humor is very relatable. So people with anxiety will be like, yeah, that's me. And I think, these are people who they probably look up to. And if they're able to talk about it, then,
Mm.
then it makes it easier for them to. But to get back to your question, I think it was, we played around with that quite a bit. And we always wanted to have a lot of humor in there, but we also wanted it to go deep. And so there are times where, I would say there's more humor maybe in the first half, but we wanted there to be humor throughout. But we also wanted there to be periods where people would have a little bit of not a breather from the humor, but where they could go deeper into the experiences of the comedians, so they could feel what they're feeling and have that intimacy. And we played around with that. I think if there was too much humor, then we wouldn't have been able to go as deep. And so it was really important for me that it was funny, but that it was also deep and intimate, and that you really got to know these characters, and that you loved these characters and related to these characters, that you were with them on the journey,
Mm.
not laughing at the things that they do that maybe some people wouldn't understand, but laughing with them. I mean, and they're so self-deprecating, and so it
Yeah.
was, I don't know, it just really kind of worked. I mean, it worked almost better than I expected it to. I mean, it just really resonated, and the comedians were, they were really open. They were funny, but they were also vulnerable, in the interviews, and it just, I think it helps to talk about a subject that's difficult for some people to talk about, when you can laugh at the same time.
You mentioned exposure therapy
Hmm.
earlier, and how you feel it's effective. You demonstrate it in the movie. Can you share with our listeners a little bit about what that is?
Sure. So exposure is part of cognitive behavioral therapy. And, some people call it CBT, and it's a form of therapy that's very effective for people with anxiety and other conditions. And so the exposure part is behavioral, and it's focusing on the things that we avoid. With anxiety, there's so much avoidance. We don't want to do things because we think we can't handle them. They're too hard. It's not going to work out. We worry, 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 and then we don't do things. And that's why, it's so much so that with some people who have more severe cases of anxiety, they don't leave their home because everything is a danger. So with exposure therapy, you're confronting your fears in a safe environment, and you talk about, the patient will talk about what they're fearful of and what they're avoiding, and then you come up with, I mean, it's done differently with different therapists, but generally often, you will then come up with a list together of the things that you want to confront, and then you go through the process slowly and carefully or safely, so that you start to confront those fears. So it's not like if you're afraid of heights, you're not going to the first day, you're not going to go to the top of a bridge and have to look down that bridge. Maybe you'll watch videos of bridges, or you'll do things in steps, generally, in order to get to that place. And I think the idea is that, we think that these things that we're fearful of are so problematic, they're so big, we can't handle them. And the process of exposure therapy helps people to realize that, this isn't as big of a deal as I thought. And it becomes much more manageable. And then you start doing things in your life that, hopefully that's the goal. You start doing things in your life that you didn't do before because you thought it was too hard. And so it really can be very effective in that way. I mean, it's not for everyone, but it's something that is very effective for a lot of people. And I really believe in that. And that's why, after seeing this work with some of the kids in the Nick News episode, I felt like, okay, we to be able to see, spend more time. I mean, that was a half-hour episode that I didn't have the luxury to spend years with, like I did with this film. But if I was able to spend 4 months or so, 3-4 months with somebody in that form of therapy, then it could be something that could be really effective and interesting for people to see.
It is really interesting, and you actually take the time in the movie to show some examples of exposure therapy. Can you give our audience a little tease, if they come to see this film, what they're going to be able to witness?
Yeah, sure. Well, for Tiffany, it was really it was focused on her kids. And so one of the things that was done that she had to do was write over and over again, maybe my kids will die today.
Wow.
It's a crazy thing to see, and it was a crazy thing for Tiffany to hear. But she had to write it over and over again. That was one of her exercises. And so all of the exercises were so that she could really kind of immerse herself in the fears that she has, because she had fears of her kids dying, doing, the most basic things. And so that was one of the first exercises that she had to do. And, it kept getting harder and harder. And yeah, I mean, I think it's a little, it's a little crazy for some people, or people look at it and they think, okay, this is the craziest kind of therapy, but it really, I don't know, it really can be an interesting and helpful thing for a lot of people. So that was one of the examples that you see in the film.
You
trying to think
mentioned
of something else that maybe wasn't in the film that we I don't want to give too much away, but
Yeah. Well, one of the things
yeah.
I did want to ask you also was you mentioned that you've struggled with anxiety,
Hmm.
and that I was wondering if when making this film, because it's a long process, and going through the stories of all the people that you filmed, did you learn anything new about yourself in this process?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, I did. I think one of the things that really stuck with me was when the therapist that you see in the film with Tiffany and
Hmm.
Natalie Noel, when she talked about how it's not about the thoughts that you have, it's not about feeling the anxiety, it's about the response, it's about what you do with it. And so I thought that was, I mean, maybe that's something that would be obvious to a lot of people, but it really kind of struck me that so having an anxious thought, okay, we all have anxious thoughts sometimes, but it's what you do with that. It's how you respond to it. It's the behavior. There are all sorts of um, behaviors that people with anxiety will, like coping mechanisms that are not necessarily healthy. Like avoidance, for example. I mean, that is, or over researching things, like I probably did with, a decade ago with the printer. And so that was just a very important distinction for me, that it's not about having the anxious thought, it's about what you do with it, how you respond to it. And that's really much more in our control than we might realize. It's not easy. And I think it takes therapy, or it takes meditation, or it takes medication. I mean, it's different for everyone. But that was, I don't know, that was a really important distinction for me.
Well, Wendy, this is a really special film. It's not preachy, it's entertaining, it's thoughtful. I have a feeling this is going to be a big hit. We've been speaking with Wendy Lobel, and we're talking about her movie Anxiety Club. Wendy, where can people go online to learn more about the film
Mm.
and upcoming screenings?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for saying that. That means a lot to me. In terms of, we have a website, anxietyclubmovie.com. You can also get there just by anxietyclub.com. And we are just beginning to get this film out into the world with Doc NYC. There will be screenings, there will be festivals that we will be listing as they get scheduled. For now, if somebody is not in New York, there are some limited tickets that they can get from Doc NYC, and that would be docnyc.net, docnyc.net, and they can find Anxiety Club, and there are some limited tickets that they can stream for 2 weeks starting, it's starting on the 16th, and that will be Saturday.
Well, I want to wish you the best with it. I hope that we can speak again in the future, but I want to highly recommend the movie. Wendy, thank you so much. It was really a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you so much, Tom. I appreciate it.
Bye bye.
Take care. Bye bye.